So welcome to Thrive, your agency resource. Joining me today from London is the founder of Caffeine Club, Charlotte Ellis Maldari. She specializes in revenue growth for design businesses, actually ambitious design businesses. We'll be talking about selling creative services with confidence, which is where that ambition comes from. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So you work predominantly with creative leaders, just like I do. And you have a whole understanding about the self-limiting beliefs that a lot of creative leaders have because they are typically practitioners that come from larger agencies and they're now out on their own. What are some of the things that you've noticed in terms of where those fears come from and what the self-limiting beliefs and fears are actually all about versus what they think they might be about?
So typically, as you said, I work with founders, partners, and directors within predominantly design businesses, and predominantly between 2 and 10. There's a number of clients who are a lot bigger than that, but that's a typical kind of range. And generally what happens is they're founded by, which won't come as a surprise to you, a creative who's broken away from a bigger agency or a more established agency. They've been very used to being highly protected with inside a design environment, having very little client exposure sometimes, not even that much exposure to the account management team, as we call it in the UK, so client services. And then they go off on their own and they think they're going to have more time to spend on design, and actually they end up being the rainmaker, the HR person, the operations person. And sometimes that can lead to a lack of confidence about what the creative output of the studio is. The other common thing that I see a lot is, particularly when an agency has emerged as a breakaway from another agency, is this kind of sense of really caring about what their peers think, valuing that way more than they would care what their prospects think, which is when we get into danger territory for me, because revenue growth does not come from pleasing your peers. It comes from demonstrating to your prospects that you can deliver a return on investment for them, and you're the right support to be using for their
Right.
business.
Yeah, and it is such a self-limiting belief, right? As soon as we start comparing ourselves to someone else in our industry, or outside of our industry for that matter, it's a slippery slope, right? Because you're never actually going to feel quote unquote good enough, and then that impacts your ability to develop new business. And I think a lot of people don't actually make that connection. So I'm super happy that we're kind of bringing that up again. I mean, not that I mean my audience is used to be kind of making that, creating that through line. But I think it's one of those things that we just have to keep repeating over and over again because it's so true and it's so important. Um, but for those people, like along those lines, for those people who are running smaller design or creative or development agencies, who have this idea that, they're a failure unless they have a higher employee headcount or a high annual revenue growth number, right? Um, if they feel like that, what are some of the things that they may not be considering that if they were running a larger agency, they may have to be dealing with?
Well, I think there's so many silver linings in this area, and being part of a smaller agency. I'd say the number one, coming back to that mindset and that self-limiting belief about caring more about what your peers think than what your prospects think. I typically find when I work with clients who've started agencies more recently, so say within the last 5 years,
Mhm.
they can break those habits more easily. They can identify them and then start to break them down.
A little bit
The,
more self-aware, maybe.
yeah, more self-aware and just less stubborn about it being something that they can combat. Whereas the people who've been in business for a long time and have plateaued from a revenue perspective and don't understand why, because in their opinion, and actually in their client's opinion, the output of their studio is amazing and they're a massive support to those brands that they're working with. So they don't understand why they can't generate more and more new business. And it tends to be because they're limiting their output in terms of marketing and new business, because they're scared about what their peers think and they just can't break that down. So I think, coming back to that point, I think, just being able to break out of that cycle, being aware of it and being able to break out of it sooner, that's a hugely powerful thing about being a smaller agency. But equally, agility to serve multiple different markets in a year. I mean, one of the things that I encourage my clients to do when they're starting outbound new business campaign for the first time is pick 4 industries that you'd like to work with, and let's target one each quarter for a year. And don't try and do any more, but equally don't settle for less, and don't settle for less niche than choosing 4 specific industries per year, because otherwise you become a generalist and you can't A/B test what's working in terms of who you're reaching out to. And I typically find that bigger agencies really struggle with that sense of, we can double down on a particular area, see whether it's for us. They're generally more, again, I don't need to find some synonyms for the word stubborn, but they might, be ingrained in that sense of, no, we could do this for anybody. But the difficult thing, as you know, about I'm sure about being trying to be everything to everyone, is that you risk not meaning much to anyone. And yeah, that's one of the challenges that I see with those bigger agencies too.
Yeah, I would say positioning from that standpoint, positioning up to 4 verticals is probably like the absolute max.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And just to be like really clear about that, that's for companies who've not done anything before. They really don't have any indication. So they might be a couple of years in business. They don't have any indication about any clear data to back up who might be the right audience for them at that point. And I'm really encouraging them to test the water rather than mean very little to anybody. I think, and it kind of stems from that in terms of positioning as well. What I find is when smaller agencies emerge, they tend to have positioning statement, strapline, like just the mission statement that sits above the fold on the homepage of the website, whatever you want to call it. That's quite, how do I say, maybe verbose or not completely articulate about what they stand for and who they deliver that to. And actually, a nice way of doing it is, what is the ambition of the client that they serve, rather than what they do and for who.
That's right.
But smaller agencies, I find it's easier for them to narrow that down. When they're really pressed, they realize that what they're saying is quite fluffy, and that it's challenging for the prospect to interpret that means they're the right agency for them. Whereas bigger agencies are less willing to be challenged on that, and actually risk driving prospects away because they don't understand that they're the right fit for them. I mean, it's as simple as that. Saying, for example, you're a creative agency when actually you're a brand design agency working in the FMCG space, like being really clear about that. So the prospect, who may have never commissioned an agency before, so you've got to understand they might not be up in the terminology. It's all very subjective and can be interpreted different ways, especially across different geographies. So I think that's another big advantage that smaller agencies have.
Yeah. And along those lines, talking about how that translates into new business, because it is like the number one thing of how new business is developed, and it's sort of the make or break in my mind for new business. So specifically around, and I know new business is your forte, specifically around this idea of establishing really strong boundaries, especially from the point of a discovery call, for example. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So one of the challenges that I think smaller agencies have when compared to bigger agencies is confidence on initial calls with clients, because at that stage a lot of people have a very bare pipeline in terms of new business. They could be quite afraid to turn away any prospective clients. They are at risk of trying to be everything to everyone. When somebody calls, then it's not typically what they would do. They're trying to shoehorn their process in rather than actually be the right fit for them. So yeah, I think it's so important to set those boundaries on those initial calls. I think, one of the things that I see as being really useful is having some kind of backup script. Maybe not script is the right word, so backup prompts of things that you may not have covered on the call, and making sure you encompass everything on that call, because really I aim for the initial discovery conversation to be around 30 minutes maximum. And during that time, you need to be able to elicit the complete scope of the brief, the commercial challenge that the client is facing, above all else, and and also their budget, really, really pushing until we establish, even if it's not a figure, but just a sign of comfort or discomfort with a particular number. So important. Otherwise, any time wasted after that point of pulling together a proposal. And, I'm sure the listeners can identify that pulling together proposal on a case by case basis, really difficult, particularly when we're trying not to exchange our time for money directly, and we're trying to price based on value rather than hours spent. So it's so important to be really strong during that call, and also tell people that you're not for them, that you offer them an alternative. Don't be afraid to say, I'm afraid that's just not the way we work, or perhaps outline exactly how you work and say, does that tally with what you were expecting? Does that sound like what you want? Because we understand that it's not for everybody. And especially with startups and scale ups in particular, where they're bootstrapping and they're super keen in terms of how they're spending their money. That's hugely important. And then that kind of, I want to divert off into the subject of return on investment and proving effectiveness, but that's an entirely different topic. Also of great value during those calls in order to get the most out of those discovery calls.
Right. Well, we will talk about that in a second, because I think that's important too, especially because we're talking about creative services, and it's part of it could be a part of a difficult conversation, right? Let's face it, agency life looks very different than ever before. Remote and hybrid teams need better tools to help them communicate and access files, track their time, manage client budgets, and more. If you believe that it's time to streamline things once and for all, Workamajig is the all-in-one agency management platform built to help you do just that. Head over to workamajig.com/thrive to learn more. Back to the show. But I just wanted to put a pin in something that you said. When we're talking about boundaries, right? This is just, I don't know why, I feel like it's really, really important. When we're talking about confidence, right? Like selling your creative services with confidence, boundaries are one of the ways that it comes across that you are confident as the leader or rainmaker of your organization, right? Because the more that you say, no, we can't do this little interim project, this Band-Aid thing, and kind of leapfrog our process, or deliver something in 3 weeks when it typically takes us 3 months. Having those boundaries is really important, because what it conveys is that you don't need the work, right? That you are not desperate. There's no sort of what I might call like an anxious attachment style around the business development. It means that you're not going to acquiesce to all of their sort of unfounded questions or requirements, right? So once you establish that you are the one leading the process, you are the one with the expertise and guiding that client, I don't want to use the word power dynamic, but there is a power dynamic a little bit when it comes to client and agency relations, right? So obviously, I was just going to say, the more that you get into the relationship, it becomes more collaborative. But from the onset, you do not want to be in a situation where they're demanding your process or changing and modifying your process, and you're just like essentially acquiescing to every single demand. I want it for cheaper. I want it faster. At that point, you don't have a sustainable business.
Completely agree. Or an enjoyable business either. Right. because you're absolutely right. You're setting the framework from what they can expect throughout working together, and nobody actually wants to work with a pushover. And the reality is, even if they think they do from the outset when they want a cheaper price, what they want to, the best clients will want to be challenged creatively, because they know that being challenged will take them further in their journey. Right. And you're always going to come across people who would prefer to bully, or to lead and feel like they're the creative director, even though they acknowledge they need to employ one to actually get the work done. Right. And I think that not highlighting that literally, but alluding to that in that discovery call in a very polite way, and acknowledging how you do and don't work, absolutely sets the framework from what you can expect from the rest of the project. Mm-hmm. And then it's not just about profitability, which is obviously a huge thing in this area. It's about how much you enjoy it, and ultimately, what is that relationship with the client? Because when you finish that initial project, because we all know that organic new business is so much cheaper to develop than cold new business. And so you really want to be going into every project hoping that you're going to be working with that client on a long-term basis. And at the very least, being able to get a nice testimonial out of them and some results further down the line, maintaining the relationship to the point where you feel like, they're confident and comfortable giving you that because they're proud of what you did for them.
Yeah.
So I think it's hugely important.
Yeah. That's great. And I love this sort of mantra that you have, that like the client engagement doesn't end when you send the final artwork,
Yeah.
right? It's great because it's true. Even if it's just project based, right? And you're not on a retainer with them, following up, making sure that, they have everything that they need. If they're finding new applications that have arisen, that they need additional work for, or getting that testimonial, whatever the case may be, that kind of like land and expand. Obviously, it is the lowest cost per acquisition for new
Mm-hmm.
business, right?
Mm-hmm.
But let's dive back into that ROI conversation for a second as we wrap up, because I think that is a potentially difficult conversation for a lot of folks who are trying to develop new business. And on the other end, if the client is asking, let's say specifically for um, creative services that don't necessarily tie to a specific attribution campaign, right? Like, so a brand identity or something along those lines, where there isn't necessarily a quote unquote return on investment that can be measured easily. How do you approach conversations like that?
Oh man, those are the ones that I absolutely relish. I love finding
You're in a
evidence.
minority, my friend.
I know, and it's been my blessing in business. But yeah, I love it because it's a bit like it's like a treasure hunt trying to find evidence. Because the reality is, and actually, this doesn't scare me at all, because when you're talking about attributed results, the majority of my clients work in brand design across packaging, in particular for consumer products. So it's not the internet. It's not easy to measure. Generally they're not trying to drive down advertising price on Facebook or whatever. So there's no instant gratification in that perspective. And then furthermore, a lot of their clients aren't even in the consumer product sector, so there might be something even more tangible driving the commercial objective behind the brief. So it might be around internal stakeholder engagement. I mean, there's no money, dollar signs, pound signs, whatever around that. So yeah, a real challenge. But what I always encourage people to do is look at the original objectives of the brief. And generally, the client brief as a design agency, normally it's interpreted into our lingo, but the client brief will have some real commercial objectives around it, whether they're easy to quantify or not. So I really encourage people at the end of a project to look back at what those original objectives are and just see whether any have been achieved literally by that project going to print. So I had one circumstance where a client had been approached to do a project for one of their prospects that wasn't the sexiest bit of design in the world, but allowed this brand to move from independent retail into major multiples, so into a big supermarket nationally. And it was huge for that brand. And by virtue of them actually doing the design and sending it to print, that brand had been listed in that particular national supermarket. And so the agency came to me and was like, we don't have any results. Firstly, we don't want to talk about this project. It's not the kind of project we want to win. I was like, okay, but why did you win the project? Why did you want the project? And said, because, this was the window, this was the door of opportunity into a much bigger relationship with this client. And so we wanted to explore it. I was like, okay, do you not think that situation that they came to you in is the situation that multiple clients will come to you, prospective clients will come to you in that situation? And they said, yes. It has happened several times. And I was like, okay, well, you really need to explain that is, one of the ways you work, and also acknowledge that that's a huge result. You got them into a national chain. And so even before any sales had been measured, they had a result they could put on the website. And I would say in a lot of situations, if you look at those commercial objectives, you'll find you've achieved at least one of them at the time it goes to print or hits live or whatever it might be.
Right. And that's actually probably a great talking point when you go to follow up with them, um, just as a segue to after the project has been complete, if it is project based, looking back at those objectives from the original brief. That's a great, great point to be able to start that conversation to say, okay, now we've done this. And obviously you were happy with it. Those things have been reached. Now, what else can we potentially do together?
And I really encourage clients to completely agree. There's so many things. It's an ever-growing list of things that you can do post-project with a client to enable that relationship to move forward. But one of the biggest things is, I always encourage people to position things through the client's lens and in a generous style. So one of the things you can do is book in quarterly brand planning sessions with that client, where you allow them to vent, what projects aren't they allowed to do internally? What do they want to get into? Their brand planning in the forthcoming year, and are struggling to do that. Allow them a safe space where they can talk through it. You can help them to understand how things are more feasible, more realistic financially, or in terms of the mechanics of getting something done. Plus, you've got heads up on what projects might be on the horizon in the next quarter or half year, and actually, I tend to find that the client side, the brand side client, really enjoys it, because actually they've got an external ear to kind of chat through stuff. Sometimes it's a good bitch about how things are internally, or sometimes it's just they just need to say things out loud that are in their head. So you've got to remember, sometimes there's generally marketing director, marketing manager is the role that we're dealing with as prospects of my clients, and it can be quite a lonely job. It can be quite a small team, and a lot of KPIs around how they're performing. So it's helpful to have your brand guardian be a supportive ear.
Absolutely. And I actually love the idea of calling them or branding them as vent sessions, or like safe space sessions, something like that. Whoever's listening, go ahead. You can take that and brand it. Well, Charlotte, thank you so much for being on the show today. This is a great conversation. I know everyone's going to get a ton out of it. So thanks again for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelly.
This episode has been brought to you by Workamajig, the #1 creative agency management software. Show notes at thrive.workamajig.com. Find out how your creative agency can become more productive and more profitable. Schedule your demo at thrive.workamajig.com.